Good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we're looking at the disciples' questions in Matthew chapter 24, when, in response to Jesus' prediction of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, the disciples immediately asked, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" I've shared with you that it is virtually a given among modern commentaries, and for many centuries actually, that the disciples were wrong. How so? Well, they were wrong because they mistakenly conflated the idea of the fall of Jerusalem with the end of time. Listen to a quote. I wrote an article, actually a series of articles. The articles are entitled, "Which Disciples Were or Are Confused." You can find the articles on my website, donkpreston.com or bibleprophecy.com. Anyway, John Calvin, in considering the disciples' questions, said the disciples, quote, "did not suppose that the whole building of this that while the building of this world stood, the temple could fall into ruins." In other words, the temple and the world are contemporary and will never fall, or they will fall together. And so, as suggested by that quote, hey, the disciples were wrong. They were confused. Let me read to you just a couple of quotes from other modern-day representatives of the various schools of futurism. Thomas Ice, with whom I've had some debates, says, quote, "The disciples apparently thought that all three items, the destruction of the temple, the sign of Christ's coming, the end of the age, would occur at the same time. Yet this is not the case." See, the disciples were wrong. Amillennialist Kim Riddlebarger says, quote, "It would be quite natural for the disciples to wrongly assume that the end of the age and the destruction of Jerusalem would be the same event. But this assumption may not be correct, for the destruction of the temple, cataclysmic as it would be, was not the end of the age, nor did the Lord return in AD 70. Well, if you've been paying attention to our previous videos, you know that when the Lord destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC, the Lord came. He came out of heaven. He came on the clouds. And that's what the disciples would have understood when Jesus made his prediction. Anyway, postmillennialist Keith Matheson says, and by the way, Kenneth Gentry agrees with this, quote, "The disciples' question indicates that in their mind, the destruction of Jerusalem and the close of the redemptive history are closely related in time. They do not conceive of any significant temporal delay between the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of redemptive history. Jesus' response to their question, however, indicates that their understanding..." I missed the page. "That their understanding was mistaken." That's the point that he made. You'll excuse me, I hope. Oh, here it is. "Their understanding is, quote, in need of some correction." That is in his large tome, Age to Age, The Unfolding of Biblical Eschatology. You get the point? Folks, it is taken for granted that the disciples were ignorant of the distinction between the fall of Jerusalem and the end of the age and Jesus' coming. They were confused about that distinction, or they were just simply wrong, or a combination of all three. It is therefore absolutely imperative for those who make the claim that the disciples were confused, they were ignorant, or they were simply wrong. Okay? If you make that claim, it is your burden of proof to prove that they were ignorant, confused, or wrong. Now, I don't have time this morning, okay? I don't have time this morning to completely chronicle this. So this will be an extremely short video this morning. I apologize for that. What I'm going to do over the next few videos, I'm going to show to you that it was not Jesus' disciples who asked the question, "Tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?" It was not those disciples who were confused. It was not those disciples who were ignorant. It is not those disciples who were wrong. It is, in fact, the commentators who refused to see that the fall of Jerusalem was, in fact, the coming of Christ. They refused to see that it was the end of the age. It is those commentators who are, in fact, confused, ignorant, and wrong. And do you know what? This is actually quite easy to prove. Did you know that we have the disciples' own words? We have Jesus specifically, directly, emphatically asking the disciples if they understood his teaching within certain parameters about his coming and the end of the age. Jesus asked them if they understood what he said. You know what they said? Yes. So, if Jesus had spoken about the end of the age prior to Matthew chapter 24, if he had talked about his coming at the end of the age prior to Matthew chapter 24, if we can determine what Jesus applied that teaching to, if then Jesus turned to the disciples after talking about his coming, talking about the end of the age, and making a very specific application of it, if then he turned to his disciples and said, "Do you understand?" And since they said yes, guess what? Then everyone who claims that they were ignorant, confused, or wrong in Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus was talking about the end of the age and his coming, it is those commentators who are wrong, confused, and ignorant. So, tomorrow, we're going to be looking at Jesus' teaching a little closer to see if those disciples were confused. We're going to be looking very closely at the issue of the claim. Brock Hollett makes it in his book. Most commentators make the claim, well, you know, the disciples were really, really often confused. That is absolutely true. Absolutely true. But does that mean they were confused in Matthew 24? We're going to see conclusively, does it mean any such thing? So, guess what? You need to get a copy of my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, in which I discuss all of this in depth. Pardon me. And you will, I can assure you, be absolutely amazed at how clear-cut the evidence is. The disciples were not ignorant, they were not confused, and they were not wrong. They fully understood what they were asking about in Matthew 24 and verse 3. And when we understand they were not ignorant, they were not confused, and they were not wrong, that changes our entire perspective on the Olivet Discourse. Go to my website, order a copy of this book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. Be sure to send me a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. All right? Hey, I'll see you on the flip side.